Thank you for tuning in to the best parenting show on the internet, Post Daily Dose.
It's the Post. It's the Post. It's the Post. The Post Daily Dose. It's the Post. It's the Post. It's the Post. The Post Daily Dose. It's the Post. It's the Post.
Hey, good evening, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, kings and queens, fairies and magicians. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Post Daily Dose with me, your trusted parenting advisor, faithful guide and servant on the healing journey. What's my name? Big Papa! Brian+Post. Hope everyone's doing fantastic today. We're going to jump right in because I've got a really good question. Actually, a couple questions that kind of came through today, but it's about visitation, adoption, reunification. I'm kind of making that up because I don't know if there's really such a thing as adoption reunification, but it's that scenario when there are biological parents who've lost the rights, given up the rights, terminated rights, went to jail, what have you, as this is the situation, and then, come back and or want to be in the child's life, or the adoptive parents think that eventually it's going to come to that. So how do you handle that? How do you talk about it? So I've got a very interesting perspective on that. And then just visitation in general, which I think I've probably talked about before, but I'm going to try to pull that all into this. So we're going to jump right into, hey Heidi, how you doing? Good morning over in New Zealand. I hope the weather is fantastic. And yes, I know it has been busy for you. Okay, so I'm going to read this question to you guys. Hello, I had a question for Brian. I've been following him on Facebook for several months now and have been so grateful for his insight and practical teaching. My friend, Carrie, Deanna, and I use his lingo regularly together. It has tied together so many of the loose ends that we've discovered in our adoption journeys. You may remember her, and I'd asked this on Facebook group, but I'm trying to stay off for my kids' sake. She says it's continually emerging as a bad habit, detracting from my attention for my kids. Good for you, Kristen. Good for you. That's a good decision to make, and I'm happy for you to send the question via Facebook Live. There's a little unpacking I need to do. That's fine. Before I can arrive at the question, my adopted son, 4, entered into foster care at 18 months. Just as a general, education, repetition, reinforcement, when I say that to you guys, what do you immediately think? So when I say my adopted son, 4, entered into foster care at 18 months, where does your mind immediately go to? Where I want it to go to is that he's not actually 4. He's 4 chronologically. Cognitively, he may be 4, but where's he at emotionally? He's probably at about 2, between 18 months and 2 years old. See, I want your brain to be able to go back to, I want you to, when I talk about things like this, I want you to start seeing pieces of the puzzle before I ever get all the way into it. And this has nothing to do with behaviors or anything else, but I still want you to see that. I want you to make that connection because I want you to be able to see that in your own lives with your own children day in and day out. And if you're professionals, I want you to be able to see it with your clients. He's the youngest of 4 that were removed from their home for severe abuse and neglect. Both bio parents admitted to meth use, but said it was never when they had the kids. Who knows? When reading the report, it was clear that they were repeating cycles of trauma in their own lives with abuse, drugs, and rape a part of their own stories. The parents never admitted to abusing their children, but clearly loved their kids, at least from my perspective. They relinquished rights a year after their children were removed, once they realized they were going to prison. Each child was adopted by a separate family. Their triggers for each other unfortunately outweighed living together. According to CPS, which makes sense, children who come from an environment of neglect and abuse, a sibling group with a lot of abuse and neglect can be so overwhelming for one family. So sometimes, I could definitely see how splitting up the sibling group in that instance would almost be a recommended course of action. The parents are now out of prison. My son is only able to verbalize memories of his bio parents from supervised visits when he was 2.5. I've been exchanging emails with the parents sporadically over the last few months. That's very generous of you. Very generous of you, Kristen. At some point, I assume my son will want to know his bio parents. I want to have eyes wide open and be intentional to create the type of relationship with them that allows me to protect my son while helping him process. I envision starting a face-to-face relationship with just the parents over the next few years in preparation for what I assume will arise around puberty. There's also a desire to enter in and help these parents accept what they did and move through their own trauma to be free and potentially be safer to one day have a relationship with their son again. I feel aspiring to be the person to do this, but I know my first and foremost job is to protect my son and will never want my idealistic hopes to get in the way of that or cause more damage to my adopted son. Have you encountered other adoptive parents that have discussed or done something similar? If so, what advice parameters would you advise? I know there's an agency in town that will soon offer TBRI, which is trust-based relational intervention, care and purposes work for bio parents. Too bad they don't offer that for all parents so they can be reunited. But obviously that's an entirely different scenario. Sorry for the long, crazy question. I would love your insight. If this crosses a line for what information is typically exchanged in a paid therapeutic relationship, please forgive me. No forgiveness needed. Kristen, I'm happy to address this question. And I'm happy to address this question because first and foremost, it will serve you and your family, but it will serve lots and lots of other families too. So thank you for having the courage to write in and share it. So here's my perspective. First of all, the first thing that comes up for me, I want to just be authentic and reflect to you because I think that this is probably something that comes up for you too. You said that you want to help these parents get to a place where they can, at some point have a healthy relationship with their son. I admire you for that. Here's the problem. Adults who have long histories of addiction typically also have long histories of trauma, which tends to keep them stuck in adolescence. Now, you're currently engaging with the parents, you said via email. You've been exchanging emails with the parents practically over the last few months. Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. Handle this with kid gloves for yourself, for them, and for your son. They're not ready to be back in his life. He's not ready to have them back in his life. Any mention of them is probably going to be a pretty severe trigger for him, which is going to cause a lot of behavior problems and probably it's going to cause a lot of stress. Therefore, it's going to cause a lot of behavior problems, which is probably going to really challenge your family situation. So I'm going to encourage you to handle this with kid gloves, be supportive and encouraging of this mom and dad. Be supportive and encouraging. Ask them to stay in contact with you. Provide them, I would say updates once a quarter because you're going to want to extend this process out. I'm guessing probably for another couple of years. And my sense is that they're going to want to move it along a lot faster. And that's not okay. I don't believe I don't believe that rights that have been terminated mandate visitations which are not in the best interest of the child. The child lived with them for 18 months. He came from abuse and neglect. He's now safe and secure. So it needs to be a period of time. And I'm going to say a period of time where you feel, because you guys still aren't even settled yet. I'm assuming you're probably still having challenges with this young man. And if you aren't having them, you probably will as soon as school starts. Because if you aren't having them, it's because his brainstem's not getting fully stirred up. Once he moves into school, something will start to stir that brainstem up and all of that trauma that sets there. So you're going to have a lot of work to do to create security in your relationship with him. You don't want the additional stress or pressure of biological parents in that effort that you're going to have to go through. Now let me say this. Parents, and I want to say this in as gentle a manner as I possibly can, but in a very honest way. Adoptive parents who have challenges and problems with their adopted children, and biological parents show up, there can be an unconscious opening invitation for the biological parents to come into the scenario, because it can kind of give the adoptive parent, it can kind of let them off the hook. And it's very unconscious. I don't believe that this is conscious at all. I don't believe that parents do this from a conscious place. But there can be an underlying fear and anxiety because of the challenges that are occurring, that when the biological family begins to get their act together, the adoptive family can be a little too quick to want to pull the biological family in. The problem is that you are not mindful to the degree of trauma that these biological parents have gone through. You're not aware of the extent. You're not aware of the triggers. You're basically talking about adults with PTSD. They do not have a good track record. A lot of biological parents who give up rights, have rights terminated, they relinquish because of neglect, because of drug use, because of trauma. They are the best intentioned because they are parents. They brought a life into the world, but they have their own trauma. And because they have their own trauma, and because we know what mental health looks like so often in our society, we know what it looks like in substance abuse programs, we know what it looks like in jails. You know, we know it's not effective. We know that these parents are probably not getting the kind of deep healing work that they need to really integrate their trauma and start to move forward. We know that they've come out of jail or out of prison. They're clean off of drugs, but they've now got to deal with the stressors of life. And when the stressors of life set in, it's going to stir up the same trauma that was stirred up that got them in the situation to begin with. So that's one thing I really want adoptive parents to hear. Don't be so fast to invite biological parents into a scenario, and be really mindful and very conscious that you're inviting them into your family, their energy into your family's energy vortex from a really conscious place. And it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that this kid is really difficult and you're not quite sure if you're going to make it, because that's a setup for everybody, right? I don't want you to do that. I'd rather you put distance between the biological parents. Let's stay connected. Let's work. Let's help you continue to create a secure relationship for this young man. And I know Kristen, just along with her colleague, are already doing this. Let's continue seeing you guys along the healing path. In time, and you can keep the connection. He may or may not ask. You never know. You know, I always say, my mom and dad always told me I was adopted. I always grew up knowing, never had any interest. And I believe that fundamentally I never had an interest in knowing anything about my biological family because I felt secure in my home. I felt secure. There was no question about who my mom and dad was. And my sister, on the other hand, always had questions because I felt like she was insecure. So I believe the more security you create in your relationship, the less inclined he may ask, and you answer. And you don't have to go into a lot of detail, but you answer. You tell him the adoption story. Talk to him about the things that he went through that brought him into your life, and how grateful you are to have him in your life. Okay, so there's healing that goes on there, but you don't have to go into a lot of detail. I was just in a home a month ago, 3 weeks ago. This was strange. I was in a home with his adopted parents, and it just came up about the young man's, he's 18 years old, about to go to college, and it just came up, and the dad said, "You want to know where your mom is, your biological mom? Everyone to know. I mean, she just right down the street." And the kid was like, "Huh?" I mean, it was like, whoa, what just happened here? I mean, he's just like, "Yeah, she's just right down the street. I just saw her the other day." And it was so interesting. It was so fast, for this kid who hasn't seen his mom since, probably doesn't even remember what she looked like, to be told that she's right around the corner. So I'm going to follow up with them and just check in with them and see how things are going after that disclosure, because we processed a little bit, but that was pretty heavy. So here's the thing. Put some distance between you and the parents. Give them some time to live their life. Give them some time to start working their life out. Be supportive. Give resources. Provide that support as someone who loves them and cares about them, and one day wants them to be able to reconnect with their son, and that to be a positive thing. But right now, you've got your hands full just trying to take care of this young man and help him heal through the trauma he's experienced. And you communicate that. One day I would love to see you guys come over here and us spend time together, and that's a beautiful experience. And what that reminds me of is I've got another set of adopted parents in California that I've been working with off and on for the last couple years. They've got a daughter who's now, I think, 7, 8 years old. And her biological father has come into the picture, and he's gotten his act together, and they've actually opened their home up to this guy. He's gotten his act together, he's gotten remarried, he's working, they have a home, and he comes from a few hours away once every couple months, and he stays with them. He and his wife stay with this other couple and the adopted daughter, and she gets to spend time with them, and she gets to sleep on the floor in their bed they're in her bedroom, so they get in her bed and she gets to sleep on the floor next to them, and it's really a pretty amazing thing. But they've also worked really hard to create a lot of security and a lot of certainty with this little girl, because she had a lot of challenges. So it is possible to make the scenario happen. It's possible to create the scenario. It's possible to do all the things that you hope to do, but I'm just going to advise you to go slow. Go slow, because this has got to be on your son's terms, no one else's. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that again. Any kind of reunification has got to be in your son's best emotional interest. It's in your son's highest emotional interest. When you can look at a scenario that may include his biological family, and you can say, is this in my child's highest and best emotional interest? And you can say yes, then you'll know it's time. But until you get to that point where internally you feel good, because right now it's not a good place. I feel it. Right now I feel that it's not time. And I don't want them to put pressure on you and end up creating stress. Put a little distance, because they will be looking to use the belief, the feeling of the child, the image of the child, the fantasy of the child, and the fantasy of the home to elicit oxytocin in their brains to help them feel better. And that's not good. They've got a lot of grief work to do, a lot of shame work to do, a lot of trauma that they've got to do in order to get to a place to where they'll be ready to truly step up and re-engage in this child's life. And when they do, the first thing I want to hear out of their mouths is, "I'm sorry." I'm sorry. If they're not at a place to where they can apologize and beg his forgiveness, then they are not at a place to be able to create healing for your son. So in the meantime, you keep doing what you've got to do, and you let them figure out their lives, and although you want to help them as much as possible, your responsibility is that little kid in your home. That's your responsibility. Like I said, give them some resources, point them in the right direction, but you stay focused on who your responsibility is. Gary says the bio parents will also come from and with the old parenting matrix. That's absolutely true. Hello, Mama Wilma. So what Gary's saying is the bio parents will also be coming from an old paradigm of parenting perspective. So that's very important for you to remember. So when you start to re-engage these adults in his life, then they've got their belief patterns which you haven't been working from. So that's going to take education, which brings up a whole nother point. When it's time, when you think it may be getting closer, now you educate them. Now you give them the books. You guys, you go and have some study time with them. Go to some family therapy with them. Engage a process of healing with them separate from your son, because the adults have to be healthy before they are given the opportunity and the right to love this child. Okay, so last part of this question for tonight came up today. Over the years, I've had parents who have talked about their children, their foster children, are mandated, what have you, supervised visits with biological parents. Biological parents who may not be very healthy, number one, and number two, biological parents who may or may not, who've lost rights, and who may or may not be getting their children back. And the courts oftentimes are pretty quick to want to push these children into visitation, and the ones who suffer are the parents who are raising them and the children, because these visitations are stressful. And most foster parents will say that after my child comes back from visitation, it takes me at least 3 days to get them calmed down and regulated again. And the reason is because it takes cortisol 36 hours. High levels of cortisol takes 36 hours to clear through the brain and the body. So there have been instances where I have advocated for visitation. Absolutely. When the parents have gotten their act together. If the parents have not gotten their shit together, no visitation, because it's not in the best interest of the child. We are hearing more and more about professional entities talking about trauma-informed. We're hearing more and more about schools and courts talking about being trauma-informed. It's a book I'm working on right now, the Trauma-Informed Handbook. We're hearing all of this lingo, but what we oftentimes fall down and fail from point one is we don't realize that being trauma-informed starts first and foremost with ourselves. If we are not aware of our own stress and our own trauma, if we're not aware of our own reactions, if we're not aware of our own old parenting matrix programming, then we cannot be truly trauma-informed. We will be trying to do trauma-informed from a fear-based perspective, and that doesn't work. Being trauma-informed requires you to be aware of your own shit. And if you are not aware of your own shit, you're going to mess up trying to be trauma-informed for a child. In fact, it's a setup. If you're not aware of your own shit and you're trying to be trauma-informed, what's going to end up happening, because the kid's not going to respond the way you think they are, because so many of the things that you're doing are still based in fear and stress. And because of that, the child's going to start acting out. But what the adults are going to do is they're going to say, oh, well, we've created a trauma-informed environment and the child's still acting out. That's the problem. You haven't really created an effective trauma-informed environment because you're not a trauma-informed adult. Now, hang on a minute. Let me climb down the ladder off my soapbox to get me all worked up here. Here's the thing. I am not an advocate for visitation with parents who have not gotten their act together. If a child cannot go to a visitation with a parent and come back, first and foremost, I feel like visitation should happen with the foster parents present. Oh, God. This is going to go far too long. There's too many dynamics here. So don't be afraid to advocate for there not being visitation. Fundamentally, if the parents have not done their work, if they are still as dysfunctional as they were when the children were removed, and I have been vehemently opposed to visitation when there's no hope for reunification. And let me tell you when they're smaller children. When there are children 10 and younger who really are not emotionally strong enough to make those kind of decisions, I've been vehemently opposed to any visitation until the children hit pre-adolescence and can start making decisions for themselves. Because then they have a little bit more cognitive control. They can understand that they're not going to just lose this secure base that they've established in this home that they have, and this bed and these toys and these parents who love them and this consistent food and love and nurturing. They're not going to just lose that and go back to this home of trauma. See, small kids don't have that. Until we hit the age of 7, we don't even begin to have the ability to think abstract. So until you're 7 years old, until the brain hits 7, you don't even begin to have abstract thinking ability. It's very concrete. It's very black and white. And that's why so many small children go to visitation, come back home, and are stressed out because all they can experience is the trauma, the emotions, the threat that exists during the visitation that they're going to lose their safety. So they go back home to their secure home and they're completely stressed out because they don't have that abstract ability. So I'm going to tell you, be a very, very strong advocate. If those visitations seem stressful and overwhelming for your children and you're not able to help process through it with them, you're not able to support them through that grief, you're not able to help them through that level of trauma, and you're not able to help those visitations be more regulating and be more helpful, be more nurturing, be more supportive, then I would say get them cut, because they can always be picked up again when the child is a little bit older. But when the state puts these traumatized children in your home, and I feel really strongly about this. Number one, they're already doing you a disservice by not training you on what it's going to take to really help these children. So they're setting you up to have to go through war, and they're not equipping you. They're not equipping you with what you need to go through the war. They're just putting you in the war. But when they place these traumatized children in your home, and then they continue to do things that are both stress-invoking and potentially traumatic, you've got to draw the line. And here's how adamant I am about it for you as foster parents. Tell them if they insist on the visitation, they need to move the child. That's how insistent I am. I do not believe that well-meaning, loving parents who are extending themselves in their homes to care for children and help children feel safer are required to continually be subjected to bad policies and ignorant systems that aren't willing to extend themselves to understand trauma. And so at some point you have to draw the line, and I support you in drawing the line. And honestly, that's hard for me to say, because I would hate for a kid to lose a secure home, a secure placement, but I can almost guarantee you it's never going to happen. That freaking social worker will get with that judge, and they will figure something else out besides that visitation if you draw the line. We have to start drawing the lines and using our strength as foster parents, as adoptive parents, to get what our children need, because the system is not going to give it to you. The system is not going to lay it out for you. The system is not going to just say, hey, this is available. Let us help you. Let us do this for you. Unfortunately, and it's sad, because there's so many systems that are broken. A friend of mine who's a retired social worker just sent me this big expose on the social services in Norfolk, Virginia. I worked with that social service department, so I get it. I understand it. And it's such a sad thing. But your social workers, They are overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed. They're stressed out. They're doing the best they can. They're not trauma-informed. Your judges aren't trauma-informed. And I am happy at any point in time to be a support, to be an advocate, to be a resource, to help any of you get the things in place that you need to help your children have more emotionally healthy opportunities. So if Big Papa can do that for you, I'll do it. All right, you guys just push me to the limit, push me to the brink. I love you guys. God bless you. Remember, in any given situation, we always have two choices. We can continue to react from our same blueprints and imprints of stress, fear, and overwhelm, and we can just keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And you know that Einstein says that is the definition of insanity. Or we can stop. We can take 3 to 10 deep breaths. And remember, courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in its midst. So you take those 3 to 10 deep breaths. You allow love to well up. You get more courage, more courageous, and you go fight. And I'll fight with you. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.